So Fred's going to talk about the neural correlates of responses to psilocybin during meditation and music listening. I've always wondered about whether headsets with music is going to last as the methodological standard for psychedelic sessions, so I'm sure he's going to talk about that. Frederick Barrett, PhD, is a cognitive neuroscientist and assistant professor of psychiatry and behavioral sciences at the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. Dr. Barrett earned his PhD at the University of California, Davis, working at the Center for Mind and Brain with Dr. Peter Giannata on studies of neuroscience and of music, after which he completed a postdoctoral fellowship at the behavioral pharmacology working with Dr. Roland Griffiths at the Behavioral Pharmacology Research Unit at Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. Dr. Barrett uses music and pharmacological interventions, including administration of psychedelics, along with brain imaging to investigate the biological basis of altered states of consciousness and emotional experiences. Frederick Barrett.
Thanks. Okay, thanks. Thank you very much for that introduction, Neil, and thank you all for coming to hear me talk about stuff. Sorry for the confusion too. The talk at this point will only be limited to discussion of meditation and psychedelics, specifically psilocybin. And before we get started, I'm terrible at doing this at the end of talks, so I've decided to start doing it at the beginning of talks. None of what I'm going to present to you is possible at all without a team of dedicated scientists, and I just want to acknowledge them first. So Dr. Roland Griffiths is my mentor, and I'm grateful to have him as a colleague, and he was one of the first individuals to publish a human clinical trial in the United States on a psychedelic after the passage of the Controlled Substances Act, so thank you. Catherine McLean and Roland Griffiths kind of initially conceived of this study, which I'm going to tell you about today, and secured funding for it. Catherine was essentially critical in getting me hired into Hopkins, and I'm grateful for that. And Mary Casamano and Matt Johnson. Mary is an impeccably beautiful human being who is the primary guide for this study, and Matt Johnson is a senior investigator in the study team who advises. And Al Garcia also has been involved in the study, as well as Teresa Carbonara and Derek May, who are postdocs on our team. And Maggie Taylor, Laura, Ethan, Kishore, and Brennan have been invaluable research coordinators for the team. We've received funding from the Hefter Research Institute for this study. Our team also received support from the Council on Spiritual Practices and none other than the National Institutes on Drug Abuse. So with that out of the way, I also want to kind of give you more of an introduction to the talk. We're going to talk about the interaction between psilocybin experience and meditative experiences. And you may ask, well, why in the world would you do such a thing? Many of you may know, but if you don't know, I'm going to try to kind of give you some basis of that. The executive summary is that there seemed to be, at least anecdotally, some relationship between experiences that people have reported through meditation, through contemplation, through sensory deprivation, or other practices such as these, and experiences that have been reported during the effects of a high dose of a psychedelic. And you don't have to take my word for it. To kind of make this a little more present, I want to kind of play a game. And I admit I don't actually know what's going to happen, if it's going to work or not. I tried this one other time, and it worked beautifully. It was at Horizons in 2015. So if you've seen this before, please try to not respond. But we're going to play a game, and it's called Occasioned by Drug or Not. And I'm going to read you a vignette, and I'm going to ask you to vote with a show of hands who thinks that this experience was occasioned by a drug or not. And I'll be your host for this evening. This morning. Anybody object? No? Okay, good. So, all at once, as if it were out of the intensity of the consciousness of individuality itself seemed to dissolve and fade away into boundless being. And this, not a confused state, but the clearest, surest of the surest, utterly beyond words, where death was an almost laughable impossibility. The loss of personality, if so it were, seeming no extinction, but the only true life. I'm ashamed of my feeble description. Have I not said the state is utterly beyond words? Okay, so show of hands, who believes that was a drug-occasioned experience? Lots of people. Okay, who believes that that was not a drug-occasioned experience? An equally, I think most of you raised your hand twice. Okay, so if that was so, that's great. This was a quote that was used by William James in the Variety of Religious Experiences in his 16th lecture on mystical experience. It was a quote written by Alfred Lord Tennyson. It begins, "I have never had any revelations through anesthetics, or drugs, but a kind of waking trance, this for lack of a better word, I have frequently had quite up from boyhood, when I have been all alone. This has come upon me through repeating my own name to myself silently, till all at once, as if etc., etc." This is really kind of a mantra practice or a concentration practice on the self that led to this really kind of dissolution of the self, which is a key component of what we consider a classic mystical experience. Okay, so I think we're 0 for 1 so far. Let's try again. In my mind's eye, I felt myself instinctively taking on the posture of prayer. I was on my knees, hands clasped in front of me, and I bowed to this force. I wasn't scared or threatened in any way. It was more about reverence. I was showing my respect. I was humbled and honored to be in this presence. The presence was a feeling, not something I saw or heard. I only felt it, but it felt more real than any reality I have experienced. And it was a familiar place, too, one I had felt before. It was when I surrendered to this that I felt like I had let go. I was gone, or should I say this earthly part of me was. It was still in some sort of suspended animation awaiting my return. I was in the void. The void had a strange and indescribable quality to it, in that there was nothing to it but this feeling of unconditional and undying love. Wow. It felt like my soul was basking in the feeling of this space. I have no idea how long this lasted. Time and space did not exist there. It was all different manifestations of this love feeling I found myself wrapped in. So who thinks that was not a drug-occasioned experience? Okay, well, not many people. Who thinks that was a drug-occasioned experience? And you would be correct. Okay, so for 1 for 2, that's not bad. So this is actually, and some of you may have seen this before. And actually, so that's maybe a little cheating too. So this, Catherine's used this as a prime example in talks, and so is Roland, of a mystical experience occasioned during one of our psilocybin sessions. So this was the report of a participant from one of our psilocybin sessions, and the really striking thing is this person, to the best of my knowledge, didn't really have any education in terms of the philosophy of religion or any deep and abiding knowledge of the papers that we'd published on the topic of mystical experience. But if you look at the bold, this person points out clearly each of the factors of a mystical experience that were defined by Stace in 1960, coming from some of William James's work and through to our mystical experience questionnaire. So there's reverence, and there's more real than any reality I've experienced. This is called noetic quality. And in the void is an element of complete mystical unity experience. Having a strange and indescribable quality to it is related to ineffability, which is a peculiar thing, and unconditional undying love related to deeply felt positive mood. Time and space did not exist, so this transcendence of time and space. These are the 6 or so factors of mystical experience that we use to kind of operationally define this peculiar experience that seems to be particularly amenable to or encountered during psilocybin experience. Let's try one more time. Reason and imagine and all mental chatter died down. Past and future dropped away. I forgot who and what I was, my name, manhood, animalhood, all that could be called mine. It was as if I had been born that instant, brand new, mindless, innocent of all memories. There existed only the now, that present moment, and what was clearly given in it. It took me no time at all to notice that this nothing, this hole where a head should have been, was no ordinary vacancy, no mere nothing. On the contrary, it was very much occupied. It was vast emptiness, vastly filled, and nothing that found room for everything, utterly free of me, unstained by any observer. Who thinks that was drug occasioned? Okay. Who here's read Sam Harris? Okay. And who thinks it was not drug occasioned? Okay, well, you're all right. Okay, so 2 for 3 is not bad. You all win. The prize is you get to hear me talk some more. So this is a quote from Douglas Harding on an experience that Douglas Harding had in India that Sam Harris attributed to the understanding that is the basis of Dzogchen practice. And he used this example in his book, Waking Up, which if you haven't read it, you should really, really read it. Okay, so what do we have here? We have some potential, on an anecdotal level, we have some coincidence between descriptions of experiences during meditation, descriptions of experiences with psychedelics that may have some interesting similarities. There are other shared subjective experiences during meditation and psychedelics that are worth noting. During both experiences, you can explore subtle levels of conscious awareness. You can get an authoritative sense of the interconnectedness of all people and things. You may be able to get an increased value of the present moment and compassion and loving kindness. And interestingly, you may also get this kind of decrease or ablation of the sense of self. There are many Buddhist traditions for which the purpose of practice is to forego or kind of destroy the self. And this is also an experience that can happen with psychedelics. And again, the mystical experience can be shared between these two experiences that can be encountered, and that involves the experience of unity, deeply felt positive mood, and transcendence of time and space, and then ineffability. So what we have so far is anecdotal evidence of a potential shared experience between meditation and psychedelics. We have some subjective effects that people report during both of these experiences, but there's also a bit of a neurobiological justification for thinking that there may be some overlapping elements in these two experiences. Somewhat recently, Dr. Judson Brewer, he was at Yale, he's elsewhere now, but he conducted a series of studies investigating the neural correlates of meditative experience. And in this particular study, he asked both experienced meditators and novices who were not fully trained in meditation, but who received instruction in meditation before during the participation. They meditated in an fMRI scanner, and they completed 3 different types of meditation: choiceless awareness, loving kindness, and focused awareness. And what Dr. Brewer found was that there were specific brain areas within which activity was decreased during meditation in people with an established meditation practice, but this activity was not decreased in people who did not have experience or who were not trained meditators. And two of the most important places here are the medial prefrontal cortex, which decreased during loving kindness and focused awareness in meditators, but more importantly, the posterior cingulate here, which decreased in meditators during all meditation types. In a follow-up study, Dr. Kathleen Garrison, who's still at Yale, conducted a neurofeedback study where she took people who weren't necessarily trained in meditation and gave these people instruction in meditation and had a couple different conditions while people were trying to meditate in the scanner. And one condition in this neurofeedback business, what is that? So neurofeedback is a general method by which you can be measuring brain activity and giving feedback to a person based on their brain activity, not necessarily based on what you want or don't want them to do, but based on how the brain is reacting to people. So, or brain is reacting to a given task. And so one of the conditions in this task was meditate and just observe what happens to the blue line. So so they were presented with a blue, kind of like a thermometer, and the thermometer was blue when activity in the posterior cingulate was decreasing, and the thermometer was red when that activity was increasing. And the first condition, they said, well, okay, just look at the thermometer and meditate. And in the second condition, they said, try to make the thermometer blue while you're meditating. And when they got people out of the scanner afterwards, they found that people said, yeah, when it was blue, it was amazing. I had this just effortless awareness. I was able to meditate without effort. And this is really just to say that this study kind of really brings a bit of a mechanistic and maybe even somewhat causal role of the posterior cingulate in supporting effortless awareness in some types of meditation practice. So posterior cingulate is decreased in meditators compared to controls. It's possibly mechanistically related to successful meditation. And there's this great review by Leach and Sharp in 2014 that demonstrated that regions of the posterior cingulate can be related to either narrow internally directed focus, which you may experience during a focused awareness practice like mindfulness of breath, and a slightly more dorsal region of the posterior cingulate could be involved in external and broad attentional focus, which you may encounter in something like an open awareness or a choiceless awareness practice. In this review, they also kind of pointed out that some of the really most interesting aspects of this brain region, the posterior cingulate, is in kind of self-referential processing. So when you do things like decide whether this adjective is descriptive of you, or is this face mine or somebody else's, or is that a behavior that I would engage in? You're really, one of the key nodes in the brain that's dealing with that kind of processing and that decision making is the posterior cingulate. And why is that interesting? Because this is a region that really should be involved in meditative practices where you're focusing your attention on the breath, or you're opening all sense doors and allowing anything that arises in consciousness to to be attended to. And so why is that interesting? Because, it's pretty remarkable how well these two brain regions that were identified in meditation overlap with brain regions that Dr. Carhart-Harris and the Imperial College group indicated as being decreased during the effects of psilocybin using multiple brain imaging modalities within the MRI. And in a follow-up study in their group, Dr. Suresh Muthukumaraswamy, it was also kind of highlighted in Robin's paper on the entropy hypothesis in the brain with psychedelics, that essentially desynchronization of this region, the posterior cingulate, was positively associated with a decrease with the experience of disintegration of the self or the ego. And in another study from another group completely, Michael Kometer published this from Dr. Vollenweider's group, a relationship between decrease in neuronal synchronization of the posterior cingulate and increased ratings on the five-dimensional altered states of consciousness spirituality scale under the effects of psilocybin. So just kind of pulling this all together, what do we have? We have anecdotal and potential shared phenomenology between meditative and psychedelic experiences. We also have, maybe kind of a plausible shared neurobiology of these experiences. It kind of begs the question of, well, okay, if there's a shared phenomenology, if there are shared neurocorrelates of these things, would the therapeutic benefits or the supposed therapeutic benefits of one translate to the other? Could they be complementary to each other in therapy? Those are the second or third questions down. I think the first question we really want to ask is any of this real? Like, if we took a psychedelic and gave it to someone who had an established meditation practice, what would they say? Would they say, my God, that is completely linear with experiences I've had on retreat. That space was familiar. I've been there before, or I've heard of this before, but I'd never actually truly experienced it. Would they say that, or would they say, well, they're similar enough. They're not exactly the same, but I could see how you could mistake the two. Or would they say they're dissimilar but complementary, or would they say, why the hell did you do that to me? Hopefully it's not the latter, and we based on everything else, we have a strong suspicion that it's much more of the former, but this is essentially, in a way, one of the questions we wanted to try to approach in the study that I'm now going to show you, to try to begin to address the question of what the relationship is between meditation and psilocybin and how they interact. We developed a study that is a multi-phase study. It has two phases, and these different phases both involve brain imaging and various doses of psilocybin. So in the first study, participants are enrolled in a study where they either get placebo or a moderately high dose of psilocybin. I'm not going to tell you the dose because the study's ongoing and we don't actually want to unblind the exact dose yet, but it's a moderately high dose of psilocybin. And participants in the first phase of the study undergo an MRI at screening, and then they undergo another MRI the day after each of their drug sessions. And in the second phase of the study, for people in the first phase who got through it well and tolerated everything and were excited to continue and for whom we thought it was a good idea, we enrolled people then to come into the second portion of the study where we scanned them under the acute effects of either a placebo or psilocybin. Overall in the study, so we've completed 31 people out of the target 40. We've enrolled 38, so we're like in the home stretch. And the average lifetime hours of meditation of a volunteer in the study is roughly 6,700 hours. That's roughly equivalent to meditating an hour a day every single day for 18 and a half years. So these are people with a substantial experience base behind them. The person with the maximum reported lifetime hours they reported roughly 20,000 hours of lifetime meditation, which is equivalent to an hour a day every single day for 52 years. And of course, this person didn't have quite a 52-year-long practice. They were on, multiple week and month and multi-month long meditation retreats where they were meditating for 12 to 18 hours a day. So that seems to add up, but suffice it to say that these are very experienced meditators on average. And actually, just over half of the participants in the study did have prior exposure to a hallucinogen. Most of them, this was only one or two experiences, and it was a long time ago. And for everyone, no one in the study had an exposure to a hallucinogen before the establishment of the daily meditation practice. And this was very important to us because we wanted to really capture the first interaction of really deeply established meditation practice with a psychedelic experience. I'm going to present some of the data from this study because we're still analyzing it, and the study in some parts is still ongoing, but we have some really interesting preliminary results already. Many of the groups who have done brain imaging, fMRI specifically with with psilocybin have noted a decreased connectivity of the default mode network. So this is an internally directed attention network that involves the posterior cingulate and self-referential processing, and also processing of the self in space and time, autobiographical memories, lots of things like this. Very internally focused, self-directed network. And correlating with decreases in a sense of self, this network and its connectivity kind of goes down or goes away during psychedelic effects. This has been shown by other groups, and we're actually showing the same thing. So these are brain regions that show decreased connectivity with the posterior cingulate under the acute effects of psilocybin in study 2, just at resting state with no meditation. And interestingly enough, this is an effect that the group at Imperial College London has kind of hinted at, and we're hinting at it too. So interestingly, so this is kind of a paradoxical effect. During the acute effects of psilocybin, connectivity of the default mode network decreases. The day after a psilocybin experience, connectivity of the default mode network seems to increase compared to baseline. And this is, and our findings are actually pretty particular. When I compared just resting state the day after a placebo to resting state the day after a psilocybin experience, I actually didn't find any group differences. And it was kind of a bummer because I thought this is going to be really rich. And then I went and correlated connectivity after psilocybin with the degree to which a person experienced a mystical experience. And lo and behold, there was a positive association there. So what that means is to the degree that a person encountered a mystical experience during their psilocybin session, that was associated with the degree to which there was increased integrity in the default mode network the day after their psilocybin session. And I think we've sunk an awful lot of time and effort, rightfully so, in understanding the acute effects of these drugs and the phenomenology and the neurophenomenology. But what we really need to begin to understand is, well, what happens the day after, what in the week after, and the month after, and if a person has been, found relief from depressive symptoms for 3 months, well, how is that happening, and what are the mechanisms? And I think this is one step in that direction, understanding this. Okay, so that's default mode network connectivity at rest. Has a lot of implications, but I'm not really going to get into that. And also, we want to really understand in the long term, well, if these changes are happening, what's the implication for long-term outcomes? So to be determined, right? So also in the also in the MRI sessions during study 2, where people were under the effects of psilocybin during the session, we asked them to complete these meditations, focused awareness or mindfulness of breath. So this is a meditation where you pick one point of focus and it's typically a somatic point of focus. You focus on the sensation of inspiration or expiration, or the feeling of air passing the tip of your nose as you're doing this. Some people focus on just the entire somatic body feel of the torso as it's moving up and down. But this is really a concentration practice. We also ask people to complete meta-loving-kindness, which is practice that involves wishing love and peace and a number of things for various individuals in your life. It's a heart-opening practice, and you can reach a space of unending and limitless love at the end of this. We ask people to try to jump into that space rather than go through the mechanics of metta. And finally, we ask people to complete open awareness practice. So unlike focused awareness practice, where you have a single point of focus and you're supposed to essentially hold that focus to the exclusion of all other sensory information, open awareness, you have all sense doors opened. Anything that arises in consciousness should be acknowledged and then and let go without attachment. So while people were in the scanner under the effects of psilocybin, we asked them to complete these meditations, and after each meditation, we asked people to complete ratings that kind of indicate the characteristics of those meditations. And I'm kind of running a little behind, so I'm going to really quickly flip through these, and I apologize for the quickness, but and also I apologize for the figure legends here. The left 3 bars in each graph are placebo, and the right 3 bars in each graph are psilocybin. The red bars are for focused awareness, the green are for metta, and the blue are for open awareness. And essentially what we see here is, under the effects of psilocybin, stability of the meditation increased for metta and open awareness, and the vividness of all of the meditations increased under psilocybin. Feelings of equanimity increased for metta and open awareness, and mental effort decreased for all meditations under psilocybin. Distracted by images and distracted by sounds. These are interesting because imagery is replete in psychedelic experiences often, and within focused awareness practice, people were more likely to be distracted by the imagery. The imagery seems sometimes inescapable, and if you're trying to hold a single point of focus to the exclusion of all other things, you can imagine that a really cacophonous visual field might be a problem, and it turns out it was. And meta and open awareness not really statistically significant. And so think of this, where we have people under the effects of psilocybin in an MRI scanner. It's loud, it shakes, it booms and cracks, and it's kind of constricted. And you can imagine that the sounds would be pretty salient. But interestingly, for focused awareness, people are no more or less distracted by the sounds of the experience than they were during placebo, and people are actually less distracted by sounds for meta and open awareness. And finally, distracted by thoughts generally went down for meta and open awareness, and distracted by body sensations went up for focused awareness and meta. So jumping from this, and I don't have much time at all, but the interesting things here are the correlations between the activity of certain brain regions decreased overall. The overall connectivity of the ventral default mode network with all other components in the brain, as well as the visual cortex and sensory motor cortex, decreased as a function of psilocybin. But the correlations between sensory motor cortex and default mode salience and visual networks actually increased. So it's this specific connection of sensory motor cortex with visual and attention networks and self-referential networks. This is really interesting, and it kind of follows the phenomenology of focused awareness, whereby overall connectivity in the brain is decreasing, but you're really beginning to tightly couple your sensory cortex, that thing that's processing incoming stimulant information, with what's important and visual processing. For meta-loving kindness, there were decreases in connectivity of the visual cortex to cingulate and default mode network, and with open and non-dual awareness, there were decreases in correlations between sensory motor and anterior cingulate and visual cortex. And this is very interesting because if you saw Milan Scheidegger's talk a couple days ago on the Zurich meditation study, there's actually a lot of really interesting interaction of the sensory motor network and changes of that during the effects of psilocybin, or after the effects of psilocybin 2 days after. So what we're showing acutely, they're showing a similar effect 2 days later, and this is really going to be a rich area to investigate. So what do we see? We see changes in the brain activity during these meditations in psilocybin. It's actually consistent with the meditation, so that there may be some kind of facilitative effect. And I just want to leave you with a couple thoughts. These are subjective reports from participants who were within the study. Really speaking to the linearity of the experience they had with psilocybin to the experiences they've had with meditation. This person had 2,000 hours of meditation, and said it was the taste of the third noble truth. It's possible to end suffering. Suffering has an end. It's not home where I belong. I felt at home, at peace. Where I belong, it was truly amazing. This person had 5,000 hours of lifetime meditation before she entered this study. Pure body and pure awareness, all and everywhere, nowhere. That was her, kind of quintessential description of the experience. And this person had 12,000 lifetime hours of meditation. I replayed all of the peak experiences I had ever had while meditating. And I just want to leave you with this because it struck me, and I think about it a lot. There's growing awareness of the lack of separation between self and other. I feel a total lack of duality. No good or bad, yesterday, today, sorrow or joy. The experience is of the unity of all things and the complete incompetence of language. I'm aware that language actually keeps us in a state of suffering, of separation by naming things like life and death. It seems like these dualities are fictions, and I hope we can all come to that insight. Sorry, I kind of rushed at the end. We have a long way to go to really truly understanding these types of experiences, but hopefully by understanding the relationship between subjective effects, neurobiological underpinnings, and the long-term consequences of those effects, we can come to a much better understanding of how these things work and what we can do with them. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you, Fred. Dr. Frederick Barrett, Johns Hopkins.
Thanks.
Thank you.